What is going on, guys? This is Skyhound, also known as Geek Detective Pierce, and welcome to episode 0. So, this is going to be part of my TokuBakuhatsu section of my video slash audio podcast. And for those of you who are Godzilla fans, likely have heard about Godzilla Minus One being released. Well, I just went to go watch it a few hours ago, and safe to say, this is probably by far like the best one that I've seen yet. I have left in the description below my brief, non-spoiler, quick thoughts on the film upon leaving the theater. And with that being said, I do want to let you guys know that this one, as I mentioned, is going to be filled with spoilers. So here is your spoiler warning. And like I said, that is your warning for this film. If you have not watched it, don't bother watching this one. Go watch it first, and then you can either check mine or you can check someone else's review on the film after you've had a chance to see it. But with that being said, let us begin. So this film does take place post World War II in Japan, roughly 1954. And we have the main character, Koichi Shikishima. Gosh, names. Anyway, this guy was a former pilot. We later find out he's a kamikaze pilot. And he lands on the island of Odo to supposedly get his plane fixed. However, later on at night, there's a creature that attacks them, and one of the repairmen mentions to it as Godzilla. Despite being told by one of the repairmen to try and attack it so that the others can live, he hesitates, thereby killing everyone else except himself and the remaining repairman. So, as a result, Koichi has survivor's guilt, and he has that recurring nightmare of what happened on the island. By the time he gets back, unfortunately, he runs into a woman named Noriko, who is then carrying a baby girl, so to speak, and she's running from some people who thought that she was a thief. But eventually, he takes her and the baby in, and he finds out that the baby's name is Akiko. As some time passes by, he manages to get a job as a minesweeper and comes across a scientist by the name of Kenji Noda, a captain of the boat by the name of Hyoji Akitsu, and a rookie by the name of Shiro Mizushima. So the job is pretty straightforward. They're trying to gather the mines that were left around during the war and then detonating them safely. However, as that's happening, there was a nuclear test done by the United States, and that in turn affects Godzilla. So the Japanese learn that there's this creature that is not just attacking, the Japanese ships, but also the US ships, and they get reports stating that something has been attacking, and the US and tensions between them and the Soviet Union pretty much kind of like causes a lot of issues. And if the US were to assist with Japan, that's going to cause a lot of suspicion among not just the Americans, but also their enemies. So the Japanese realize they have to do it by themselves. And The minesweeping ships come across one of the destroyed ships of the US. That was obviously done by Godzilla. Now, Koichi spots in the water like some dead fish, and that is an indicator that Godzilla is nearby. Well, much to the horror of the crew, he pops up and he takes out one of the other minesweeping ships. So Koichi and his team actually are the only ones left, and despite trying to outrun the giant monster, they managed to let loose one of the bombs, but there's just one fundamental problem. They didn't attach the fuse to let it off. So this then causes Koichi to have to man the gun, and he manages to set it off. They thought that, that was enough to kill Godzilla, but are surprised to learn that he actually survives. As a result, they managed to buy enough time for a heavy cruiser by the name of Takao to try and assist. Unfortunately, after the engagement, Godzilla pretty much destroys it using its atomic breath. As we learn later, it is referred to as a heat ray. Unfortunately, when Koichi explains the situation to Noriko, she unfortunately is on a train to work in Ginza. Godzilla makes its way over there, wreaks havoc, and despite the attempts of the military to try and suppress it, Godzilla at this point is just plain annoyed. He's like, I didn't want to do this, but you forced my hand. And then we see the money shot of the fins going up. And as I mentioned once when I was doing my trailer analysis, the fins going up is almost like, the cocking at the hammer of a gun, or in this case, lighting the fuse to a cannon. And once Godzilla lets loose, it then creates an atomic blast. And what is interesting about that was that it shows the actual effects of the atomic blast. So you get the shock wave, and then at the same time, right after the blast radius, you also get the pullback, or I guess I could say a vacuum of sorts, which in this case blows away Noriko, supposedly killing her after Koichi attempts to try to save her. Now, prior to all that, just seeing the way how Godzilla looks, the um, the design for this guy, oh my goodness, this guy was something else. So let me pull this up real fast. If that's not intimidating, I don't know what is. And just to prove my point, give me a second. There's another view. Now, while this is the toy, frankly, the way how they did this guy, honestly, I was really impressed. And frankly, for those that actually are fans of the big G-Man, definitely try to go for it if you're really into this one, because I can tell you right now, this film is definitely going to do well overseas, as if it hasn't done well in Japan. But anyway, back to the film. So Basically, Koichi is stricken with grief, and despite, you know, the government's attempt at trying to stop it, they fail, and um, the scientist tries to convince Koichi, why not join us? Because I think I might have found a way to defeat Godzilla. So Koichi goes with Noda, and he explains and outlines to the military, at least the ones that are around. Um, well, they're more like private citizens now that have experienced war. Should have been more clear on that. But anyway, what I like about this part is that it does do a slight nod to the original Godzilla back in 1954. So Noda comes up with a plan, basically utilizing Freon tanks, and what they're trying to do is basically lure Godzilla out into the open to one of their trenches and have it sink. And supposedly, the pressure is supposed to try and kill him, supposedly. But if that doesn't work, then you have Plan B. Plan B, in this case, using balloons to try and bring Godzilla up to the surface. What that practically does, if you have, I will deviate this for just a little bit. If you have watched any videos of people who have done, diving with no tanks, like they're tied to a line and then they drop to a certain depth, as they're going back up, the pressure from going up, it's pressing upon your body. And, the longer it takes for you to go up, the more painful it gets, and more likely it's going to cause enough pressure to have you killed, which is essentially what Noda is trying to do to Godzilla. Prior to that, Koichi tries to convince that reluctant repairman, Sosaku, the guy that, survived and the rest of his crew did not during that one night on Odo Island. He tries numerous attempts to try to contact the guy. Nothing works until he has to bring up the past. That eventually is enough to piss the guy off. And he's like, why did you even send me these letters? What are you trying to do here? So Koichi tries to explain, essentially, you heard about what's happened. Godzilla's coming, and I need your help to try to repair a plane that our team found. Eventually, he finds out that it is a prototype Kyushu Shinden fighter. And what I like about the design of that plane, even though as much as I want to try to find the design, what that is that you have the propeller at the back of the aircraft, and that's supposed to act as a type of thrust. So they managed to do what they can to arm it with not just cannons, but also a few explosives as well. And Koichi is trying to tell Sosaku, I am going to try to have this plane agitate Godzilla, and then when it tries to attack, I am just going to ram it right into its mouth, thereby exploding it. So the day of the operation is at hand for Japan, and despite them trying to prepare, Godzilla is already like several steps ahead, and I mean that literally. Like, he is right, and despite him making landfall, eventually, sorry about that. having a few connection issues here. But anyway, what happens is that Koichi manages to get into the air. Godzilla is already on land. Manages to lure it back out into the water, and then the operation of Noda begins. And it is at this point where they actually play the iconic Godzilla theme. And so they managed to, I guess I could say, corral Godzilla to a degree with the two ships that they have. And then they managed to have the Freon tanks wrap around Godzilla. It activates, dragging him down. It didn't work. He still survives. So they try bringing him up. But unfortunately, they find out that the balloons come up, and there's only one logical conclusion. He broke through the balloons, and that's basically allowing him to get free. But they're not able to bring him up. This is when the rookie comes in with a fleet of tugboats to try and bring Godzilla to the surface. They manage to do so, but despite being injured, Godzilla is super pissed off and is about to launch his heat ray on them. But prior to that, that's when Koichi comes in and does what he said. He slams the plane into Godzilla's mouth. The plane is destroyed, destroys his head, and as a result, the charge overloads, destroying the body along with it. So the crew thinks that Koichi's dead, but they see something in the air, and a parachute opens, revealing that he actually ejected. So prior to that whole thing, Sosaku actually forgives Koichi for what happened, and he tells him that he needs to live for Akiko, the little girl that he decided to adopt. And despite him getting a hero's welcome, from those back on shore when the battle is supposedly finished, Koichi gets a telegram. He learns that Noriko is alive. Not only that, but as a result of Godzilla's earlier attack on the city, she is supposedly suffering from radiation poisoning. Now, while I only saw the mark for a brief few seconds, pretty sure that the mark on her neck resembles one of Godzilla's fins. And she asks him, "Is your war finally over?" And he's pretty much telling her, yes, it is. But despite that being the case, the end of the film, towards the end, you see a piece of Godzilla, floating in the water. And then you hear the theme kick up again, and you see that it is starting to repair itself. And I'm like, damn. So, yeah. I mean, I was kind of going through this pretty quick, and I know there's probably a good amount of stuff to cover, but I will say this, that the pacing of the film is good. I like how they, how do I put this? The switch between the destruction and then the human elements was really well done. And frankly, the design of Godzilla was really good. As I showed you guys before, the way how they did the design was really good. Now, if there's a few parts that really caught my attention, I would say it would be these. Give me one moment. So this part was one, and if memory serves me right, that was more with regards to the ship attacking, and the guy just basically shrugs it off like this was nothing to him. But the one that kind of like got me going, oh crud, these guys are in trouble, was this. Give me a second. So this was one. I mean, look at that face. He's like, yeah, I see you, and I'm coming for you. And then we also got this part, which was also from the trailer. We see the genuine fear of Noriko as she sees Godzilla, making landfall and attacking, Ginza. Now, if there's one little bit that I wanted to mention, before I get to it, I do want to mention that I wanted to give a quick shout out to Goji Center and Dangerville. If you guys haven't subscribed to their channels, if you're a big fan of the G-Man and other monsters and the like, go subscribe to them. Make sure you hit the like button and all of that. But yeah, that being said, there is one bit that I do want to bring up, and it's actually the actor, or at least one of them. So the actor that was going on in my head, it was actually the one who was the rookie. And you're probably wondering, who is the guy? Well, I'm not going to mention the name, but I will say that if I probably did this little action here for any Tokusatsu Super Sentai fans, you might know if I did this. There's only one character that likely did this. And if you know it, you know. But overall, I will say that this film was really well done visually. I did mention in the non-spoiler that they did a good job with, the pacing, the switch between the destruction and the human characters. Story-wise was pretty straightforward. I mean, you have people trying to survive, basically what could be considered a nuclear attack, which is essentially what Godzilla symbolizes. And another obvious theme with the films is not just the balance between humanity and nature, but also the hubris of man or scientists, and the constant attempt at trying to control nature, which of course we can't. And there are a few nods to the legendary Godzilla film, and if you guys watched the trailer, you likely would have spied it. And frankly, I will say that the fact that this director enjoys the legendary films, I'm like, more power to him. And this film is probably, I would say, the third time that Godzilla has gone back to its roots. There was another analysis video that I watched once. This was back in the 90s, before I even knew of Godzilla, at least in terms of the live action, because the only one that I knew back in the day was the silly cartoonish attempt done by Hanna-Barbera. So, that being said, if I had to give this an overall rating, subjectively, I would definitely give this at least a 9 out of 10. And objectively, definitely a 10 out of 10. This is probably like by far the best modern spin on a classic kaiju that was ever attempted. Now, as for the soundtrack, I don't know if I'll be able to find it, but overall, the way how it really gives that despair stacked on top of despair, as the director put it, kudos to the composer who worked on this film. It was really well done. And with that being said, this has been the end of my general thoughts and lengthy review of Godzilla Minus One. Now, with that being said, since I am going to be doing another film, I did mention in one of my tweets that there is another film that I'm going to be reviewing. And for those of you who are fans, this is what it's going to be. One moment. Hold the thought. So, for Sunday, if you haven't been paying attention, I'm going to be going over this guy. Yeah, Shin Kamen Rider. And that is for tomorrow. This is going to be episode 1 of my TokuBakuhatsu, discussion as well as reviews for my, I guess you could say, podcast in this case. But yeah, that is going to be episode 1 for tomorrow. Hope you guys enjoyed this analysis and review of Godzilla Minus One. If you haven't had the chance, go ahead and try to watch it in theaters, because from my understanding, this is definitely going to be one of those limited releases, since it did release in Japan earlier, and then to not give out any notifications about the next legendary Godzilla film, they had to release it over here in the US. I don't know what time it's going to be released over in Europe, but for those of you that live over in those sections, hopefully you guys don't have to wait long. But overall, this has been Skyhound, also known as Skyhound, also known as Geek Detective Pierce. Stay sane, stay frosty, stay humble, and as always, try not to be too difficult during the holidays. Peace.